Hi, I'm Lavena. 3 days before the wedding, they sat me down like I was a burden they were finally about to unload. His mother pushed a prenup across the table, smiling like it was already signed. "Sign it," she said, "or the wedding's off." He didn't argue, didn't flinch, just stared at his hands and whispered, "You should probably sign it." They thought I had nothing, no voice, no power. But I had $79 million and a plan. So before we begin, tell me, what time is it where you are? And have you ever had to smile while being silently gutted by the people who claimed to love you? Because this isn't a love story, it's an autopsy. And it starts right here. I didn't cry, not a tear. I simply walked out of that dining room like I had already won. My heels tapped softly against the marble floor as I moved toward the guest restroom, holding the leather envelope as if it were something sacred, though everything about it felt dirty. My reflection met me in the mirror, calm and composed, but my hands trembled. I placed the envelope on the counter and stared at it. Then I laughed, quiet, bitter. So this was how they played. I took a deep breath and opened it slowly. The air in that powder room felt colder than it should have. As I scanned the pages, my stomach twisted. Clause after clause. It was an insult wrapped in legal jargon. Ramona didn't just want to protect her son's assets. No. She wanted control. Full control. Every word dripped with contempt. Infidelity clauses, inheritance waivers, even a condition that if I ever sought therapy without Braden's approval, I'd be penalized financially. I could almost hear her voice saying, "We can't have you acting unstable." Braden's signature was already there. Neat, precise. Probably signed before dinner. Probably before he picked me up tonight with that faint smile like everything was fine. I felt my breath hitch. This wasn't just a document. It was a declaration of war. I pulled out my phone, my real one, and turned it off. Then I reached into my clutch for the backup burner I kept, just in case. Call it paranoia. Or maybe I'd just learned the hard way. Always be ready. I dialed, 1 ring, 2. Then, "You better not be calling me from a closet in that mansion," my lawyer, Joanna, muttered. "Tell me you didn't just get a prenup." "I got it," I said. Hand-delivered. Mid-dinner. I heard her sigh. "Talk to me." As I spoke, I kept my voice low and my back straight. I outlined every page I'd scanned. She asked the right questions. I gave her the right answers. We weren't shocked, just disgusted. "They think I'll sign it," I said, like it's nothing. There was a pause. Then Joanna said something that stayed with me. "They've underestimated you. Again. Let them." We hung up. I stared at the phone in my palm, heart pounding. Then I slid the prenup back into its envelope and took a moment to breathe. The mirror still held my gaze. I smoothed my dress, touched up my lipstick, and walked back out. The dining room buzzed with polite conversation, but when I stepped in, a hush followed me to my seat. Ramona's eyes tracked my every move. Braden avoided looking at me altogether. I sat down slowly and picked up my napkin. That's when I folded it, carefully, deliberately, into a daisy. My mother taught me how, when I was 10, on a rainy day after school, "When people show you disrespect," she used to say, "you show them precision, grace, and then if they push, you show them strength." I placed the daisy beside my plate like it belonged there. Then I smiled. Ramona raised a brow. "Well?" I tilted my head. "It's quite a document," I said. "You must have had it prepared weeks ago." Her smile was thin. "We just want what's fair." Braden finally looked up, almost sheepishly. "It's not personal, Lev." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Instead, I turned to him and said, Of course not. It's just legally binding emotional warfare served with steak and potatoes. He flushed. Ramona looked pleased with herself. The rest of dinner crawled forward, but I didn't say another word. I didn't have to. Every smile I offered was calculated. Every nod rehearsed. And when dessert came, some overcomplicated lemon tart, I excused myself again, this time claiming I had a call to take. I went to the veranda instead. The sun was low, casting golden streaks across the valley. I stood there, letting the cool air touch my face. And for a moment, I let it all in. The betrayal, the humiliation, the bitter taste in my mouth that wasn't from the wine. But underneath it, there was something else. I didn't feel defeated. I felt clear. This wasn't just about a wedding. It wasn't even about love, not anymore. This was about power, about worth. And they were about to learn the cost of underestimating someone who built herself from nothing. From behind me, I heard Nerida step out. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside me, her hand brushing my elbow gently. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah." She looked at me for a moment, then leaned in. "Whatever you're planning, make it good." I smiled. "Oh, I will." Back inside, Ramona was laughing about something with Marjorie. My brother Cullen was telling a story I'd heard 5 times already, and Braden was drinking his 4th glass of Merlot. I sat down again and waited for Ramona to glance my way. When she did, I gave her a smile so serene it made her blink. Before I left the room, I smiled and whispered, "Challenge accepted." I was walking straight into war, with a folder of evidence and a smile. It was nearly midnight by the time I stepped into the guest house. The air inside was still warm from the day, but the silence had cooled it. I kicked off my heels at the door, unzipped the side of my dress, and let it fall over the chair like the night had never happened. But of course it had. Outside on the patio, the vineyard shimmered beneath the moonlight. The Keller estate stretched for miles in every direction, rows of neat vines, perfectly aligned like soldiers following orders. I wrapped a light shawl over my shoulders and stepped outside, barefoot. The stone beneath my feet felt grounding. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I thought. I was still there when I heard the door creak open behind me. I didn't have to look to know it was Nerida. She didn't speak right away, just handed me a glass of wine and took the chair beside mine. We sat for a moment, letting the breeze settle between us. She was the one to break the silence. "You always said, if they ever showed their real face, you'd be ready. So, are you?" I took a slow sip. "I'm not surprised," I said. "But I am disappointed." She looked at me sideways. "In him?" "In myself, for hoping he'd be different." She didn't push. She never did. That was the thing about Nerida. She knew when to speak and when to let silence do the work. I reached for the small clutch I'd dropped on the patio table earlier. From a hidden pocket inside, I pulled out the second phone. Matte black. No identifying features, just clean utility. I powered it on, watching as the signal bar lit up. Then I scrolled through until I found the contact labeled Isolde Brandt. Nerida raised her brow. "Still using that name?" I smiled. "She told me once, if you're not planning for the worst, you're already behind." The phone buzzed twice before a voice picked up. "You're calling early," Isolde said. "Late, technically," I replied. "I need to activate the counter-contract, the one we drafted last December." There was a pause. "He signed something tonight, didn't he?" His mother handed me the prenup like she was delivering a pizza. "Tell me you didn't sign." "Of course not," I said, a little sharper than intended. Then I softened. "But I read every word." She chuckled dryly. "Good. Then you'll know we anticipated almost all of it. The assets clause, the therapy stipulation, the inheritance gag order. It's textbook manipulation." "I want to escalate," I said. "Quietly. No scorched earth. Not yet." Isolde was quiet for a beat. We've got the revised agreement ready. If he agrees to it, we move forward. If not, I walk, I finished, and I take the receipts. Nerida didn't say a word. She watched me like she always did, reading behind the eyes, not just the mouth. When I hung up, she took a slow sip of wine. "You're not hesitating," she said. "I've been hesitating for months," I answered. "Just not out loud." There was a knock on the guest house door. Both of us froze. I looked at the phone in my hand, then at her. Without speaking, I slipped it back into the hidden pocket and adjusted the shawl around my shoulders. She rose, whispered, "Need me to stay?" "No, but thank you." When I opened the door, Braden stood there, shirt slightly untucked, tie loose, wine on his breath. "Hey," he said sheepishly. "I was hoping you weren't asleep yet." I stepped aside. "I'm not." He walked in slowly, his gaze scanning the room like he was looking for something, maybe guilt, maybe a reason not to feel it. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he muttered. "About earlier. My mom, she didn't mean to scare you. She's just, you know how she is." I stayed quiet, let the silence stretch. He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's not like I wanted to do that. It's just, she's always been the planner. She thinks she's protecting me." "From what, exactly?" I asked, voice flat. He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, but he knew it wasn't one he should say out loud. "I mean, we're still good, right?" he asked. "You and me?" I looked at him, really looked. And for the first time in a long while, I saw him. Not the man I thought he was, not the life I thought I'd have, but the boy he still was. Afraid of conflict, afraid of truth, addicted to comfort. I gave him a small smile, just enough to keep the mask on. "We're fine," I said. "For now." He nodded, like that was enough. He walked toward the door, mumbling something about an early start tomorrow. I watched his back, his slouched posture, the slight stagger in his step. Before he pulled the door closed behind him, I caught his reflection in the glass. Still convinced I was the one chasing this wedding, and I waited until I heard his footsteps fade down the gravel path before I moved again. Still chasing the wedding? He really believed that. I sat there for a long time, letting the weight of it all settle over me, not crushing, but clarifying. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, eyes open, thinking of all the ways people show you who they really are when they think you're not paying attention. By morning, the air had cooled. The sunlight crept gently over the vines. I slipped on a light sweater, pulled my hair into a low knot, and left the guest house quietly. No one was awake yet. Or maybe they were. They just knew better than to meet me out there. I needed space, not for peace, but for precision. The garden behind the main house stretched along the property like a secret someone once cared about, but hadn't touched in years. Overgrown roses, fading trellises, beautiful in a tired kind of way. I followed the gravel path behind the greenhouse until I found the little iron bench tucked beneath a line of old sycamores. I sat, slipped in my headphones, not for music, but because people speak more freely when they think you're not listening. It didn't take long. Ramona's voice came first, crisp, sharp. She was somewhere on the other side of the rose hedge, probably by the stone table where she liked to drink her second coffee. "She'll sign it," she said. "Women like that, raised poor, no real family support. This wedding is a ladder." She's clinging. I didn't blink. Marjorie chimed in, her voice lower, a little more hesitant, but still firm. Just like she clung to Cullen when he got promoted. I still don't understand why he let her live with us all those years. There it was. The kind of insult that pretends to be confusion. They didn't know I could hear. Maybe they never really saw me in the first place. I reached into my pocket and tapped the recorder app on my phone. No shaking hands, no adrenaline spike, just clarity. I hit record. They went on, laughing, speculating. Ramona said I was a pretty face with small-town instincts. Marjorie wondered aloud if I'd planned the whole engagement just to get a piece of the Keller name. Their words didn't hurt the way they might have once. They didn't slice. They accumulated. Quiet, steady weights stacking one by one, forming a wall I'd no longer pretend didn't exist. When their voices trailed off, I stopped recording, sat still, let the silence return. I pulled out my phone again and scrolled through my messages, found Cullen's name. The last time we spoke, he told me to let things go for the sake of family peace. This time I typed, "Remember when you told me to let things go? I didn't. I just waited." Then I hit send. I took the long way back to the house, past the west orchard and down the slope behind the pool. By the time I reached the back steps, the patio doors were open and the brunch table was already being set. Ramona saw me first. "Oh, there you are," she called brightly. "We were just saying you must have gone for a little walk. Did you sleep okay?" I smiled. Like a rock. She poured coffee into a white china cup and handed it to me with a rehearsed warmth. "You should eat something. It's going to be a busy day." I took the cup, nodded, sat. Across the table, Marjorie talked about florists and seating charts, pretending her fingers weren't still laced with judgment from just an hour earlier. I didn't mention the garden. I didn't mention the recording. I sipped my coffee, added just enough sugar to keep it neutral, and matched their fake warmth with one of my own. That's the thing they never got about me. I don't scream. I don't storm out. I listen. I wait. And when the moment comes, I don't warn. They thought silence made me weak. But silence is where I sharpened my aim. Tension started long before that. Around 5:30, the staff began setting the long, formal table in the east dining room. Silver polished, candles lit, linen folded so tight it looked like someone was trying to hold their breath. I watched it all from the upstairs landing, arms crossed, a cup of tea going cold in my hand. They moved around like everything was fine, like nothing had been said in gardens or whispered through wine glasses, like weddings were fairy tales, not power plays. At 6:50, I went back to my guest house and changed, charcoal gray dress. No jewelry but a single thin gold band on my right hand. It wasn't about style, it was about armor. By 7:15, I was seated at the dinner table between Marjorie and an old Keller cousin who smelled like pipe tobacco and entitlement. Braden was across from me, pretending to engage with a friend from college. Ramona sat at the head, commanding as always, sipping something that looked like control poured into crystal. Midway through the main course, she clinked her glass. The room hushed. "I want to thank everyone for being here," she began, voice syrupy sweet. "This weekend is about family, about legacy, about protecting what matters, values, traditions, and what we've all worked so hard to build." She smiled as she spoke, but every word came like a veiled slap, and every eye at the table flicked between me and her like they knew exactly who the speech was aimed at. When she finished, polite applause followed. I clapped too, just twice. After dessert, I excused myself and stepped into the side sitting room. I needed air, not from outside, but from a space not dripping with pretense. The room was quiet, warm from the fireplace. I walked slowly, fingers grazing the edge of the old piano in the corner. I'd barely had time to exhale before she followed me in. Ramona closed the door behind her. Didn't sit. "I know you think you're clever," she said. I turned toward her, slowly, no surprise, no fake smile. "Clever women," she continued, tend to forget their place. And when they do, things unravel. I'm giving you a choice, Levena. Sign the prenup, or don't. But if you don't, there won't be a wedding. Not unless I say there will be. I said nothing, just looked at her. Let the silence fill the corners. She stepped closer, lowering her voice like she thought that made it more powerful. You're marrying into a legacy. That comes with rules. You don't get to change the script just because you think you're smarter than the rest of us. I took a breath, let it out slow. Then I spoke, softly. You seem to think your approval is still part of the equation. She blinked. But before she could respond, Braden walked in. He froze for a second, sensing the tone. Looked at me, then his mother. Said nothing. Ramona turned to him. She needs to be reminded that you're the one doing her a favor. I looked at Braden then, really looked at him, and all I saw was a man who wanted to disappear. I stepped forward, not toward him, just past them both. I'll remind you of something else, I said, voice steady. You know who has more to lose if this wedding falls apart? You. I'm not the one standing on borrowed wealth. Neither of them spoke. I walked out. The hallway was empty. But the weight in my chest had lightened. Not gone, but different. Not pain, something sharper. 10 minutes later, I stood alone on the back terrace. The moon was out. The wind had picked up. Somewhere inside, I heard laughter from the dining room. It didn't reach me. Nerita joined me quietly, hands tucked in the sleeves of her cardigan. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. You okay? She said after a moment. I looked at her. Let the question hang. I think I've stopped trying to be... Eyes open, body still, like instinct wouldn't let me sleep too deep. There's something in your bones that knows when the ground under you is getting ready to crack. I slid out of bed, pulled a robe around me, and stepped onto the small balcony off the guest room. The vineyard looked different in the early light, quieter, softer, but not peaceful. More like the kind of quiet you get before a courtroom door opens. Below, just past the hedge that lined the gravel path, I heard voices. 2 of them, familiar. I didn't mean to listen, I really didn't, but I also didn't walk away. Ramona's tone was sharp, clipped like she'd been waiting for someone to ask her to speak her mind. She's not your equal, Braden. You know that. Women like her, they come with hunger, not love. There was a pause. Braden didn't interrupt. She continued. She's using you. And you're not blind. You're just too weak to admit it. Still, nothing from him. Then I heard his voice, low, tired. Maybe, but I can't handle another scandal. If she walks, it'll look like I failed again. Failed again. Not hurt, not lost, not loved. Just failed. She won't walk, Ramona said, her voice flat. Push harder. She'll cave. I didn't even realize my hands had gripped the railing until my fingers started to ache. Through that whole exchange, he never once said my name, never once defended me. Not even a mutter about who I was, what I meant to him, or what I'd given up to stand by his side. Just silence. And something in me, something fragile and stupid and leftover, died right there on that balcony. I stood there until the voices faded and the kitchen staff started moving through the yard with trays and linen napkins, too polite to look up and wonder why I hadn't come down yet. Eventually, I went inside, changed clothes, and made my way to the breakfast hall. The dining room smelled like citrus and butter. Nerita gave me a look when I walked in, quiet but knowing. I didn't say a word, just poured myself a cup of coffee and took the seat farthest from the windows. Braden was already there, flipping through a printed draft of our vows like it was just another checklist item. He smiled when I sat down. Hey, babe. Want to go over these together after breakfast? I looked at him. Really looked. His shirt was crisp. His smile was easy. He looked like a man on schedule, a man keeping appearances. I nodded once. Didn't speak. He didn't notice the difference. Or maybe he did and chose not to. Nerida leaned in a little from across the table, speaking just loud enough for me to hear. You're not going to let them get away with this, are you? I didn't answer, not right away. I just looked at the slice of melon on my plate, the delicate arrangement of cutlery, the fake perfection of it all. Then I said, without blinking, not anymore. I stood up. Braden was mid-sentence about seating charts. I think the ushers should double as groomsmen. Saves space. I walked away while he was still talking. Didn't say excuse me. Didn't offer a smile. I just stood. Turned. Left the room. Behind me I heard the sudden scrape of a chair leg against the floor and someone saying my name like a question. But I kept walking. And as I walked, I realized something. It wasn't just the wedding I was walking away from. It was every apology I'd forced myself to accept. Every moment I stayed quiet to keep peace. Every time I thought love was about swallowing truth to stay desirable. No more. That morning, I stopped rehearsing for a wedding and started preparing for a war. Draft of the vows and wrote a new one. Just one line. I owe you nothing. Then I closed the laptop, stood, and let the silence stretch. The kind of silence that fills a room when you've finally made peace with the truth. Not the one you're told to believe, but the one that's been staring you in the face for years. By early afternoon, a knock came at the suite door. Nerida opened it before I had the chance. One of the Kellor assistants stood stiffly, hands clasped. They're ready for you downstairs. Final prenup signing. Ramona said. I nodded before she could finish. I'll be down in 10. The assistant turned and walked off, relieved not to have to linger. Nerida closed the door gently behind her, then turned to me. You're really going to sign it? I walked past her, opened the closet, and pulled out the same dress I wore the day I met Braden's father, an understated navy, simple neckline, no frills, a dress for women who don't beg to be seen. I'm going to sign what they think is theirs, I said calmly, slipping my arms through the sleeves, and leave them holding the paper they wanted so badly. Nerida didn't ask more. She just watched. The Kellor family's home office was exactly what you'd expect from a dynasty obsessed with legacy. Heavy wood furniture, oil paintings of grim men in even grimmer suits, books no one touched except for decoration. Ramona was already seated, back straight, chin slightly raised like she'd practiced the posture in a mirror. Braden stood awkwardly by the window, avoiding my eyes. The lawyer, some man they introduced to me once but never really expected me to remember, placed the leather-bound contract on the table. A gold pen rested on top, like a dare. We've included everything discussed, he said, with a polished voice that sounded like it belonged to a politician, not an attorney. It's standard language plus the protections Ms. Kellor requested. Protections. That was their word for the cage they built. Ramona didn't even look at me. She just gestured to the chair across from her. We've already delayed enough for your doubts. If we're doing this, let's do it. I sat, slowly, ran my hand across the top page. Braden cleared his throat but didn't speak. No one ever does. When they know the silence will protect them more than the truth. I flipped through the contract. My fingers moved deliberately, page by page. I paused once or twice, furrowed my brow just enough to look unsure. I let my breath hitch on a clause about property. I let the room believe I was stalling out of fear. And then, half a second longer on page 7, I reached the insert. They didn't notice. Not Ramona, who was watching my face instead of the paper. Not Braden, who never looked up from his shoes. Not the lawyer, who assumed every line in front of me was one he'd written himself. But there it was, slipped in days earlier, notarized by someone who didn't carry the Kellor name. One sentence. My sentence. A clause that voided the agreement in its entirety if coercion or misrepresentation could be proven by third-party evidence. A clause that tied it to the Kellor assets, not just the marriage. A clause I'd written under the guidance of someone who actually had my best interest at heart. I took the pen, signed cleanly. "Done," I said, sliding it forward. Ramona smiled like someone who thought the chessboard had just cleared. Later, back in my suite, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of water. Nerita stepped in, arms folded. "You signed it?" I nodded. "I did." There was a beat of silence. Her eyes searched mine. "You sure about that?" I walked to the desk, picked up the leather folder I'd used earlier, and held it up. "I signed what they gave me," I said, voice even. "But what they gave me wasn't what they thought." She blinked. "I rewrote it. They just haven't realized yet." Outside the window, laughter floated up from the patio, probably Braden's sister and a few cousins, already drinking champagne like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong, and I wasn't correcting it anymore. I was preparing to expose it. Not because I forgave her, because I pitied how little she understood what was coming. I wore that smile like armor through the hours that followed. They moved me through the banquet hall, sat me at the head table, poured my glass without asking. Every face turned to me expecting grace, gratitude, some polished version of joy. But I wasn't giving them joy. I was giving them silence, stillness, that quiet just before thunder splits the sky. By 7, the room filled up. Extended family, college friends of Braden's I never met, out-of-town guests I'd only seen once, the kind of people who remember which designer you wore but not what you said. I nodded politely, exchanged pleasantries, laughed when I needed to. Ramona stood across the room in a champagne-colored gown, one hand on Braden's shoulder like she still owned him. Braden smiled at guests, looked polished, presentable, but he never looked at me. The room dimmed slightly as dinner was served. Candlelight reflected off crystal glasses, the kind of ambiance people pay thousands for to pretend they're close. Ramona stood just after the dessert plates were cleared, glass in hand. "I just want to say a few words," she began, smiling wide, eyes sharp. "Marriage is about sacrifice, about giving. And a woman who truly loves doesn't need a title or money. She simply gives, endlessly." A few chuckled. Not too loud, not too sincere. Just enough to fill the space where someone should have said, "That's not appropriate." Braden didn't stop her. He didn't shift, didn't flinch. He just took a sip from his wine glass and let her keep going. I could feel Nerida glance over at me from 2 seats away. I didn't look back. Instead, I stood, lifted my glass, let the room settle. Then I spoke, calm and even. And a man who truly loves doesn't let his mother speak in place of his heart. There was a pause, soft, stunned. "I've learned a lot about love this week," I went on, "especially who doesn't deserve mine." Silence. No clinks of forks. No quiet coughs to soften the moment. Even the air felt like it stopped moving. Ramona's smile barely cracked, but her knuckles were white around the stem of her glass. I raised mine slightly, then took a sip, and walked away. I heard my name, once, softly. Probably Braden, maybe someone else. But I didn't turn. I pushed the heavy door to the hallway open and stepped out, the sound of my heels against the marble floor the only thing following me. Ramona caught up within 30 seconds. "What exactly are you trying to do?" Her voice was low but shaking. I turned to face her. "I'm done waiting to be respected," I said, meeting her eyes. "You'll understand what that means soon." I left her standing there, alone. When I reached the suite, the weight of the day didn't crash down on me. It settled, like something I'd expected, maybe even welcomed. Nerita came in 15 minutes later. She didn't knock. just came in, closed the door behind her, and stood silently for a moment. She saw the fireplace lit. The prenup copy, their copy, burning slowly in the flames. "You're not scared anymore," she said quietly. I didn't respond right away, just watched the edges of the paper curl, darken, turn to nothing. "No," I said finally, "just sharpening my aim." She stepped closer, her presence calm but steady. I could feel it, something shifting, like gravity itself had turned just a little, just enough to pull everything into a new direction. The next morning wouldn't be about flowers or dresses. It would be about exposure, stepped off the stage of that dinner, and I knew every smile they gave me that night would curdle by morning. At sunrise, I stood by the window of the suite. The estate grounds stretched out below me, manicured and smug. The air was still, too still, the kind that creeps into your lungs and dares you to exhale first. I didn't wear white. I wore a soft robe in steel gray, the fabric heavy on my skin. Narita brought me tea, the kind she always made when I looked like I was holding too much in my chest. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She knew the clock had started ticking. Ramona arrived just before 8. She didn't knock, just let herself in, her heels echoing across the marble like she was entering her own ballroom. She gave me that polite smile, the one polished enough to pass inspection, but soulless enough to mean nothing. "Tea?" I offered, motioning to the empty chair across from mine on the balcony. She hesitated, then sat. Her gown was cream silk, expensive, loud in its quietness. We sat in silence for a while, staring out over the lawn. From a distance you could hear the early rehearsals, violinists warming up, the wedding coordinator yelling softly into a headset. Ramona sipped once, then said, "At least today won't have surprises." I smiled. Then there was a knock at the suite door. Narita opened it, glanced back at me. Her face didn't change, but she stepped aside. A man in a dark suit entered, calm, pressed, and purposeful. I stood. "Ramona, this is Mr. Halverson, my attorney." Her teacup halted midair. He stepped forward and handed her a sealed envelope. No flourish, no threat in his tone, just a delivery. She opened it. Her fingers shook. "This," Mr. Halverson said, "is a petition to void the prenuptial agreement on the basis of coercion, intimidation, and fraud." Ramona's throat moved, but no words followed. "We have recordings," he continued, "of your direct threats. We have the independent notarization of the revised clause. Should this proceed to court, your family's assets will be subject to review, and if necessary, public scrutiny." She gripped the envelope so hard I thought it might rip. "Of course," he added, "this can stay private, if you walk away." Braden walked in just then. He looked like someone had told him to smile and hadn't explained why. "What the hell is this?" he asked, glancing at the papers in his mother's hands. Ramona couldn't speak. Mr. Halverson turned slightly toward Braden. "Legal due diligence. Nothing more." Braden looked at me like I'd just detonated a building. "You're going to destroy everything." I held his gaze. "No," I said. "You already did that. I'm just signing the paperwork." And I did. In front of both of them, I signed my name at the bottom of the form. Slowly. Clearly. Like someone signing a death certificate, only this time it wasn't mine. But Ramona wasn't done. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a manila folder. With practiced elegance, she slid it across the table. "A psychiatric evaluation," she said, too sweet. "We thought it best to have on record, in case the press starts asking questions after the wedding." My hands didn't move, but my stomach clenched. "Claiming emotional instability, manipulative behavior, narcissistic traits," she added, smiling like it was a favor. Mr. Halverson leaned in, picked up the folder, and began to scan it. He frowned. That's when the door burst open again. Narita stepped in, holding a slim tablet in one hand, a stack of papers in the other. "You might want to be more careful where you steal from," she said to Ramona. Ramona blinked. "Excuse me?" Narita walked forward and held up the tablet. "That report you just tried to submit? It uses my clinic's letterhead." Down to the watermark. Silence. "And unless you somehow gained access to our private patient template, without a license, without a file, and without a medical interview, you've just committed felony fraud." Ramona paled. "I've already sent the forensics to my legal team," Narita said. "I'm sure they'll enjoy their Sunday." Braden looked between us like he'd wandered into a storm without a raincoat. Ramona finally spoke, quietly, bitterly. "You think this makes you righteous?" I looked at her, voice steady. "No, it just makes me free." The sun kept rising. The guests kept arriving. They clapped when I walked down the aisle. But they didn't know what they were clapping for. Jazz curling through the corners of the reception hall like it was trying not to wake anyone. Silverware clinked lightly. People laughed in short bursts, too polite to be real, too nervous to be ignored. The air was full of things no one dared name. I sat at the head table in that same steel-gray gown. My hands rested lightly in my lap, my fingers folding and unfolding the edges of a linen napkin I hadn't realized I'd picked up. The same shape. A leaf. The very one Ramona had smirked at back on the first day. "That's not how we fold napkins here," she'd said. I didn't respond then. Just unfolded it, smoothed it out, and quietly did it my way again. Now it sat between my palms like a memory. Braden appeared to my left, standing just behind my chair. I felt his shadow before I heard his voice. "Why didn't you just leave?" he asked, low and brittle. I looked straight ahead. Because silence was never surrender. It was strategy. I didn't say that aloud, but I turned to him and said the next closest truth I could bear to say aloud. "Because leaving would have let you think you won." He didn't sit. He just stood there for a moment, then nodded once. Slow, like a man trying to act like he understood something far too late. And maybe he did, but not deeply enough to change anything. Across the room, guests lingered near the champagne fountain, sipping, chatting, glancing over like we were animals at a zoo exhibit. Beautiful, quiet, dangerous. But no one dared to get close enough to ask why the bride hadn't smiled once. Ramona didn't come to the reception. Word had spread through the servers. She'd left just before dinner, slipped into a black town car with no fanfare and no explanation, no toast, no goodbye. Nothing but the cold vacuum of her absence. A woman I didn't recognize, someone from Braden's extended circle, maybe a cousin, leaned down as she passed and whispered, "You've held yourself so well through all this. I don't know how you do it." I looked at her. "You have no idea what it took to keep this together." She blinked, smiled awkwardly, moved on. Narita eventually slipped into the empty seat next to mine. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. She saw what I was doing, unfolding, then folding, the napkin again and again. "You're still working through it," she said, not as a question, but as an observation. I didn't look up. "I don't know what to do with my hands when I'm not fighting." She smiled faintly. "That's because you were never just defending yourself. You were building something." I let the napkin rest. The music had shifted to a mellow, piano-heavy tune, almost too soft for the space. My phone buzzed. I pulled it from the inner pocket of my gown. Yes, I'd asked for one with pockets. No one thought to ask why. I didn't offer. Voicemail. Unknown number. I hesitated, then played it. It was her. My sister. Her voice crackled, like it was trying to push past years of silence. "I heard about the wedding," she said. "I don't know what happened, but I'm proud of you. I never said it before. I should have. That's all. No drama, No apology. Just enough. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left and the lights had dimmed, I stepped outside onto the patio. The air had cooled, dusk stretching long shadows across the stone. I was barefoot, heels discarded somewhere near the dance floor, and still holding that same napkin. The leaf. The shape Ramona once mocked now felt like the only honest thing in the room. I walked to the edge, held it up for a second, then let it go. The wind took it gently. It didn't soar. It just floated, low and quiet, then disappeared over the edge. That vow wasn't for him, I whispered to the dark. It was for me. And it was true. I promised I'd never be small for anyone again. Some weddings start a new chapter. Mine ended one,